Yesterday named former Transnet executives and senior managers Brian Molefe, Anuj Singh, Gary Peter and Pitolo Ramasabudi as individuals behind questionable contracts. He said Molefe asked the board to approve the irregular and unwarranted increase in payments from 38 billion rand to 54 billion rand for locomotives. Mahomedy said transactions for advisory services from the Gupta-linked Trillion Capital, Regiments, McKinsey and Nkonki bypassed governance processes and cost Transnet billions of rand in losses. He testified that a new board made these discoveries when it reviewed transactions associated with the state capture project. Well, the state capture inquiry resumes today with Transnet continuing on the stand. Mbalenhle Mthethwa will be crossing there in a moment, but for now she joins us in studio to give us more. A very good morning to you, Mbali. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Simpiwe.
Now, before we get to today's matters, let's just take a quick recap of some of the issues that stood out yesterday.
Okay, so yesterday we had acting CEO Mahomedy speaking on the state capture project and what really transpired. And he told the commission that when they came in as the new board and him as the acting CEO, they found that they were concerned about media reports relating to the state capture project and Transnet's involvement. And upon those media reports, they then decided to do a review of the transactions that were also associated with the state capture project, and that's when a lot of things started coming to the fore, and things like memos and evidence just coming through to show that regular procurement processes were flouted in the interest of certain Gupta-linked companies.
And we also hear of Regiment Capital having received a facilitation, or should I say a success fee of 166 million rand. What is that success fee and what does it entail?
Okay, the 166 million rand is an amount that was paid to Regiment Capital for allegedly facilitating and for going ahead and getting a loan facility from China Development Bank. And what Mahomedy told the commission is that Regiment had no business going right ahead and negotiating the loan on behalf of Transnet. He says that they already had a facility within Transnet, and Treasury could have actually been able to do and facilitate that loan for Transnet, and they then got a 166 million rand success fee, which they were not even supposed to get, because that's not what they were supposed to do. They were there to provide financial advisory services and not go straight to the banks to try and negotiate loan agreements for Transnet.
Yeah, and on the issue of the purchase of the 1,064 trains, because we understand that tender processes were flouted and the procurement policies were not followed, who gave the authority for the purchase of these trains without the necessary processes?
We had Mahomedy speaking about a relationship that Brian Molefe had with China South Rail, but that's a topic for another question, really. But going back to the procurement and the acquisition of the trains, the initial amount, the trains were initially supposed to cost Transnet 38 million rand, but you see the amount going up to as much as 54 million rand, and Mahomedy saying that this was as a result of a memo that former Transnet CEO Brian Molefe had sent through to the board for approval, and he says that this memo, which went directly to the board, was supposed to jump a few hoops, and had it gone through management and gone through all the proper channels, it would have been flagged and the increment probably would have never been approved. But because these procurement processes and certain steps were jumped, it was approved.
As I was listening to Mr. Mahomedy yesterday, he went at great length saying that the China South Rail was the only agreement that they had that was legitimate. I mean, he gave the impression that it was the only legitimate agreement that they had, that Transnet had with China South Rail.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but he does talk about China, there being a special relationship between Transnet and China South Rail, and saying that there was somewhat of a biased relationship between Transnet and China South Rail. And I understand why he would say that, it was a legitimate contract with Transnet. However, the biasness and the intimate relationship between Transnet former CEO Brian Molefe as well as China South Rail, because we also heard yesterday that Brian Molefe had met with one of their supply chain managers rather, and he met them at a time which is referred to as a closed tender period, which was not supposed to happen during that closed tender period. He had that time, that meeting and so on, and that obviously speaks to a very intimate relationship that biases China South Rail in comparison to other bidders. And he's basically saying that, looking at the number of trains that were procured from China South Rail in comparison to the other people who, the other companies that they were getting trains from, it seems as though there was a biased relationship that existed. We also see that during the tender process, when there were the tender evaluation process, you see an instruction coming from Sabonga Gama's office that, they need to waiver some of the triple BE requirements in the interest of bringing in China South Rail. And he basically says that China South Rail probably would have never made it to the short list, but it made it because the triple BE requirements were waived.
And speaking of agreements and relationships, I suppose that the contract between McKinsey and Regiment will be placed under the microscope today.
Definitely, it will definitely be placed under the microscope. We heard yesterday Mahomedy speaking about how Regiment came into the fore, where McKinsey had been awarded a contract for financial advisory services with Transnet, and then upon the contract being awarded, they then saw McKinsey then what's the word I'm looking for? Subcontracting, that's the word I'm looking for. Subcontracting Regiment capital, which was after the whole process had been finalized. And he says that this was incorrect. It did not follow procedures, in the sense that if you do come in, if you bid as a consortium, it's usually declared beforehand, and it's not an afterthought. And he refers to this as a side deal, almost as though they just came in via the back door.
Do we know if Brian Molefe will be subpoenaed?
I'm not sure of that information just as yet, but according to procedures, the Commission's procedures is that if a person is implicated, they have to be informed, and then so that they give them an opportunity to cross-examine, to apply to cross-examine the witness, and so on. So he is aware of, the implications that have been brought against him at the State Capture Commission, because he is required by the Commission's regulations to be informed.
All right, I'm going to let you go as you go prepare for today's proceedings. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That was our reporter Mbalenhle Mthethwa.